Yesterday, President Joe Biden released his proposed $5.8 trillion budget for the fiscal year 2023. Notably, the budget contains a 10% boost to current defense spending, teeing up a more than $800 billion budget for the Pentagon next year. This $30 billion gift comes after Congress already padded the U.S. defense budget beyond what Biden even asked for this year. Biden directly addressed critics of the spending yesterday. Take a listen.
The world has changed. In addition to dealing with terrorist organizations, for the second quarter of the 21st century, we're once again facing increased competition from other nation states, China and Russia, which are going to require investments to make things like space and cyber and other advanced capabilities, including hypersonics. And this will be among the largest investments in our national security in history. Some people don't like the increase, but we're in a different world today.
The budget also sets aside a new $30 billion endowment for, quote, resources to support law enforcement, crime prevention, and community violence intervention in localities over the next decade. That's on top of $20.6 billion earmarked for discretionary spending by the DOJ on federal law enforcement and crime prevention in 2023, an 11% increase over this year's budget. Here's a throwback to Biden at the State of the Union earlier this month.
The answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities.
Our rising panel joins us next to weigh in. Carly Cooperman is a Democratic pollster and CEO at Cho and Cooperman Research. And Melik Abdul is a Republican strategist. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
And so, Carly, what on earth is Joe Biden thinking here? Is there just no political upside in at least keeping the Pentagon budget flat after ending a war?
Joe Biden is trying to pivot back to the center from a position where Democrats had told him that he was going too far to the left. And we've seen that the party felt like he was out of touch and out of step. And I think he's trying to pivot back to a more center place where he's acknowledging that, violent crime is a top concern among voters, and we need to spend money to fund the police rather than defund the police, as said in the State of the Union. And in terms of the military spending, with inflation, it's really that only, I think it was a 1.5% increase in terms of spending, but he's also responding to the fact that there is funding needed for between the military, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and China's continued modernization of their own military too.
Yeah, Melik, what do you think specifically about, more resources for law enforcement? Is Biden, is it politically? I think it's probably sincere as well, but, totally rejecting the kind of far left activist talk about the police, in signaling that he wants to do this?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that, Robbie, is that this whole defund the police movement, it was never popular. Even if you go back and look at polling in 2020, there were some conversations that we had because initially the whole idea was to defund the police. And I think there was an acknowledgement then that the defund portion was not popular. So then they tried to say that we can just simply reallocate money towards different things. So it's not surprising to me, especially considering not only what Joe Biden said during the campaign, but even at his State of the Union, that funding the police is something that he was definitely going to do. I don't think that Joe Biden would perform in this manner any way different than any other president would have. Trump would have funded more for police, and Joe Biden is giving I think they now say an additional $2 billion over last year. So this really doesn't surprise me at all. Joe Biden is doing what he has to do, but also consistent with what the overwhelming majority of American people want.
And the expansion of police and military spending comes as federal COVID relief cash is running out, with HHS reimbursement of testing and treatment for uninsured COVID patients set to expire next month. Even the federal government's pandemic-era universal meal program is set to hit the cutting room floor This summer, with those funds, the National School Lunch Program fed an average of 22.6 million children each school day in 2020. And Carly, what do you read into the administration and Democrats in Congress stepping back on COVID funding in particular? Is there something, are they feeling like the issue is toxic for them at this point, and they would just rather kind of move away from it? But I mean, what's going to be the upshot of allowing all this funding to expire?
I think that they're trying to respond to the sentiments that we see voters are changing in terms of the priorities and what's most important to them. I mean, month after month in polling, we saw that addressing the coronavirus pandemic and everything that came along with it was a top issue for voters. And now, between inflation and the rising cost of living, economic concerns generally, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we're seeing, and as well as the violent crime increasing continually, we're seeing that the top priorities of voters are shifting. And Biden seems to be trying to allocate the resources that he has in terms of spending to match where voters' concerns lie.
Yeah, Melik, the inflation issue is clearly going to be so important in the midterms. It's very clear that this is like a top concern of voters, in survey results. The administration has tried to suggest that this, the current conflict, Russia-Ukraine, is responsible for inflation and gas prices and things of that nature. But I think that's not entirely persuasive to many people. So how does this budget make concerns about inflation actually worse if we're going to spend even more money?
For those people who consider themselves fiscally responsible, and keep in mind that's something that changes according to who's actually in the White House, because everybody becomes a hawk when it's the other party in the White House. I think that there will be people who are concerned about it, but let's also keep in mind that with this budget, as with all president's budget, it's a very big number. Well, the thing is that Congress actually has to pass that. So we can be pretty much guaranteed that some of this spending will definitely not be in the final budget that Biden ultimately signs. But as far as our defense, we know defense spending is always popular under any administration. So that the Biden administration is given more money, even considering what's happening now with the Russia-Ukraine invasion. The thing is that most of the American people are supportive of our military efforts. So I'm not surprised that Biden is giving such a huge number. Again, that probably won't be the number at the end, but I think it's important what Biden is doing right now. And I don't think that any president, even a Donald Trump in office or any other president, would perform differently as far as our defense spending, any different than Biden himself.
Yeah, and Carly, what is the relationship between these types of budgets, these announcements, and polling numbers that you see? Does it move the numbers, or are people? Yeah. I mean, you're the polling expert. Do you see this actually translate into movement?
Well, what I was going to say is that right now, voters, we see in polling that voters are supportive of helping to defend Ukraine. And, in terms of economic sanctions, they understand. They say now that they understand. They're willing to have their gas prices go up at the expense of, the sanctions that they're being waged against Russia. And so as there is support right now for helping Ukraine, and clearly a focus on the international turmoil that we're seeing, this is a time where voters are going to be responsive to defense funding in a way that we might not have seen, 6 or 8 months ago. In terms of the implications we'll see on Biden's approval, I don't necessarily expect to see much of a change just by the announcement of the budget, and we will see as things play out and as Congress negotiates what actually gets approved.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We'll have more Rising right after this.